I mixed 3 liquids in a mason jar. It cost me $2.17. 20 minutes later, my neighbor knocked on my door asking which contractor I hired to replace my deck. I didn't replace anything. I just remembered what they spent 80 years making us forget. There's a formula that turns gray, cracked, sun-destroyed wood back to the day it left the sawmill. Not paint that hides damage, not stain that fades by autumn. This penetrates the grain itself and rebuilds wood from the cellular level. One pass on a rotting fence and people assume you installed new boards. One coat on weathered furniture and the $800 restoration quote you almost paid suddenly feels like robbery. No sanding required, no power tools, no experience necessary. Just 3 ingredients your grandfather kept under his workbench before the wood industry taught him to call a professional instead. I'm Kaz Shimada, and I've spent years tracking down solutions that industries buried the moment they realized customers would stop calling. This one might be the heaviest I've ever found, because a $2 mixture that eliminates a $900 service cannot be allowed to spread. They didn't stop using it because it failed. They stopped talking about it because it worked too well. Let me take you back to 1860, to a workshop in London where a man named Frederick Walton left a can of linseed oil open overnight. By morning, a skin had formed on the surface, harder than varnish, more flexible than lacquer. Walton realized the oil was reacting with oxygen and forming a natural polymer. 3 years later, he invented linoleum, the world's first mass-produced floor covering, built entirely on one ingredient extracted from flax seeds. But here's what almost nobody knows. That same oil had been protecting wood for 20,000 years before Walton ever opened his factory. Ancient Egyptian tombs contain wooden artifacts sealed with pressed flax oil that are still intact after 4 millennia. Medieval cathedral doors in Germany, treated with this oil in the 1500s, are still standing today. British naval ships coated their decks with it before crossing the Atlantic, and the wood survived salt spray, tropical sun, and cannon fire. For centuries, every cabinet maker, shipbuilder, and furniture craftsman used this oil as the foundation of their trade. Then the 1950s happened, and everything changed. The petrochemical industry introduced synthetic alkyd resins, polyurethane, lacquer. Chemical varnishes flooded hardware stores. These products were shinier, faster to apply, and far more profitable to manufacture. Linseed oil cost pennies per gallon. Synthetic finishes cost dollars and required reapplication every 2 to 3 years. The industry didn't switch because the new products were better. They switched because the new products generated repeat revenue. The old formula quietly vanished from shelves, and within 1 generation, nobody remembered it existed. But I found it in a filing cabinet at an estate sale in Montana. A handwritten recipe card dated 1937 tucked inside a carpenter's notebook. 3 ingredients, equal parts, 1 jar. And a note at the bottom that read, "Tell nobody. They'll charge you for what costs nothing." The handwriting was shaky, written by someone who knew this knowledge was about to disappear. I paid $3 for that notebook. Best investment I ever made. Here's what happens at the molecular level when you apply this to damaged wood, and this is where the science gets uncomfortable for the industry. Linseed oil is a triglyceride with an unusually high concentration of alpha-linolenic acid. That's a polyunsaturated fatty acid that reacts with oxygen through a process called oxidation. When you rub it into wood, it doesn't sit on the surface like paint or varnish. It penetrates deep into the cellular structure of the timber itself. Once inside, the fatty acid chains cross-link with each other, forming a flexible polymer network that fills every pore. A study published in the Journal of Coatings Technology confirmed that linseed oil penetrates wood up to 4 times deeper than synthetic polyurethane. Polyurethane sits on top like a plastic shell. One crack in that shell and moisture rushes underneath. That's why polyurethane decks peel, blister, and turn gray within 3 seasons. Linseed oil does the opposite. It becomes part of the wood itself. Now add white vinegar to the mixture and something remarkable happens. Vinegar is acetic acid, a natural solvent that cuts through decades of grime, oxidation, and dead finish without damaging the healthy fibers underneath. While the vinegar strips away the gray, the linseed oil floods into the freshly exposed grain and begins polymerizing immediately. The 3rd ingredient is the key that unlocks everything. Turpentine, distilled from pine resin, thins the oil, so it penetrates twice as deep and cures twice as fast. Without turpentine, the oil pools on the surface and takes weeks to harden. With it, the mixture soaks in within minutes and begins hardening within hours. The total cost at any hardware store is under $2 per application. Compare that to what the industry charges. The national average to refinish a 200 square foot deck is $980. A single piece of antique furniture costs $300 to $800 at a restoration shop. And what do most professionals use as the foundation of their process? Oil-based chemistry derived from the exact same formula that's existed since 1860. The markup isn't on skill. The markup is on your ignorance. So why isn't this sold in every hardware store in America? Because the wood restoration industry generates nearly $2 billion per year in product sales alone. The broader home restoration market hit $210 billion in annual revenue. That's the size of the machine that profits from 3 ingredients you can buy for pocket change. Deck refinishing costs homeowners $900 to $2,700 per project, and the industry recommends refinishing every 2 to 3 years. Over 20 years of home ownership, that's nearly $7,000 spent on one wooden platform behind your house, a platform you could maintain yourself for under $10 total, using a formula that predates television. Here's the mechanism that keeps this buried. You cannot patent linseed oil because it's a natural product. You cannot patent vinegar because it's acetic acid, one of the oldest chemicals known to humanity. You cannot patent turpentine because it's been distilled from pine trees since ancient Greece. There's no proprietary molecule, no trade secret, no intellectual property to protect. What cannot be patented cannot generate licensing fees. What cannot be licensed cannot create exclusive distribution. And what cannot be distributed exclusively cannot build a brand monopoly. The wood restoration product market was valued at $1.9 billion in 2024. Dominated by corporations like 3M, Sherwin-Williams, and Howard Products. Their message is simple and effective. Don't try this at home, trust the professionals, buy our brand. But the active ingredient in most oil-based wood restoration products is the same drying oil chemistry Frederick Walton discovered in 1860. They're selling you linseed oil with additives and a logo, charging 10 to 50 times the raw material cost. That's not innovation. That's a business model built on making sure you never open a chemistry textbook. I need to be honest about the limitations because this isn't magic. Raw linseed oil without metallic drying agents can take weeks to cure in humid environments, which is why the recipe specifically calls for boiled linseed oil that contains drying catalysts. It can yellow slightly over time, especially on light woods like maple, but on darker woods like oak, walnut, and cedar, the warming effect actually enhances the grain beautifully. And one critical safety warning most DIY channels completely ignore. Rags soaked with linseed oil can spontaneously combust if left crumpled in a pile. In 1991, a fire caused by linseed oil-soaked rags destroyed One Meridian Plaza in Philadelphia and killed 3 firefighters. Always spread your rags flat to dry outdoors or submerge them in water in a sealed metal container before disposing. This is not optional. This is life safety. Here's exactly how to make and apply this liquid. Gather 3 ingredients from any hardware store. 1 part boiled linseed oil, 1 part white distilled vinegar, and 1 part turpentine. Combine equal parts into a glass jar with a tight lid and shake vigorously for 30 seconds until the mixture emulsifies into a cloudy golden liquid. Clean the wood surface with a dry brush to remove loose dirt and debris. You don't need to sand, strip, or power wash. Dip a clean cotton rag into the mixture and apply it along the grain using firm, even strokes, working in sections about 2 feet wide. Let the first coat absorb for 10 to 15 minutes, then wipe away excess with a dry cloth. Wait 24 hours and apply a second coat. The second coat deepens the color and doubles the protective barrier inside the wood fibers. For a weathered deck, start with the most damaged board so you can see the transformation immediately. The gray oxidized layer will dissolve on contact with the vinegar, and the golden oil will flood into the exposed grain within seconds. I remember the first time I watched this happen on my own deck. The wood was so gray I thought it was rotting. One stroke with the rag, and suddenly I could see the red cedar grain underneath, rich and warm like it had been sealed the day it was installed. Within 10 minutes, you'll be doing every board because the result is that dramatic. 1 batch in a quart jar covers approximately 30 to 40 square feet. A contractor would charge you $600 or more for that same coverage. You just did it for under $2 in materials and 20 minutes of your time. This knowledge didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because it worked so well that an entire industry had to pretend it never existed. For 20,000 years, humans protected wood with oil from a seed and acid from fermented grain. No corporation, no brand name, no expensive equipment. Just chemistry that nature perfected long before any patent office opened its doors. Your grandparents knew this formula, or at least their grandparents did. It was written in handwriting on index cards and tucked inside kitchen drawers. Then one generation stopped passing it down because a television commercial told them there was a better way. There wasn't a better way. There was just a more expensive way. The contractors know this formula. The manufacturers definitely know it. The $2 billion wood restoration industry prays every single day that you'd never learn what you just learned. But now, you know, 3 ingredients, equal parts, 1 jar, 1 rag, 20 minutes. That gray deck you've been avoiding could look brand new by this weekend. That fence your neighbor keeps suggesting you replace could be restored before dinner tonight, all for less than the cost of a cup of coffee. The wood didn't die. It was waiting for someone to remember what the industry made us forget. I tested this on a dining table someone left on the curb for trash pickup. The finish was so destroyed I could barely tell what kind of wood it was. One application of this mixture in walnut grain appeared like a photograph developing in a darkroom. 2 coats, and that table looked like it belonged in a furniture showroom, not a landfill. My neighbor saw it on my porch and offered me $300 for it. I didn't sell. But I did teach him the formula. Now his entire fence looks like he spent a fortune, and it cost him the price of a sandwich.